Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you could come and join us today. I'm Karen Monkman. I'm CIS president and professor emerita from DePaul University in Chicago. I'm going to very briefly introduce Kara Brown, who will take over from here. Kara Brown is our awards chair. She was also awards chair last year. She's an associate professor in the Department of Educational Studies at the University of South Carolina. She's a recent past co-chair of the Language Issues SIG, also at CIS. She's very active. Her research is on language policy and equity in education in Estonia and the southeastern US. And as the awards chair, she will do most of the moderating today.
Thank you, Karen. It's wonderful to see you all here, even virtually, at this Gail P. Kelly award ceremony. I'm thrilled to give you a little bit of a background about the award and then introduce the Kelly Award Committee Chair. So the Gail P. Kelly Award was created to honor the distinguished comparative educator Gail P. Kelly and her many contributions to CIS. This award honors a doctoral dissertation that addresses social justice and equity issues in an international context. The Gail P. Kelly Award is conferred on an outstanding EDD or PhD dissertation that manifests academic excellence, originality, methodological, theoretical, and empirical rigor, and that deals with issues of social justice and equity in international settings. So we have two winners today that will be introduced to you by the Gail P. Kelly Award Committee Chair, Dr. Karen Ross, who is an associate professor in the Department of Conflict Resolution, Human Security, and Global Governance at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and she did phenomenal work as chair of this committee. So I want to thank her and all the committee members for all the careful and detailed and timely work that you did on this very important committee for CIS. And with that, I will pass the virtual floor over to Dr. Ross.
Thank you, Kara. So before I introduce this year's dissertation Gail P. Kelly Award winners, I want to first, as Kara was saying, thank all the members of the committee who worked with me to read a tremendous number of first abstracts and then full dissertations. There were some really wonderful dissertations that were written and completed in the past few years in the comparative and international education field. This year's two winners really stood out, but we had a pretty tough job. So I want to thank all of the committee members who did this work along with me, Emily Morris, Mong Yu, Regina Cortina, and Sonia Sani. So thank you to all of them for their work. And now I would like to introduce in turn each of this year's two Gail P. Kelly Award winners. The first is Rosa Acevedo, who completed her dissertation at the University of Minnesota, a dissertation entitled Crossing a Broad Divide, Enacting Educational Mobility Justice in Study Abroad. And as I introduce Rosa, I just want to highlight a few comments that were made about her dissertation by the committee. Committee members wrote, Rosa's dissertation weaves together a compelling narrative for reflecting on study abroad and international exchange in new ways that go beyond the historical lens through which we have studied it and that make applicable recommendations for theory, policy, and practice in the field of comparative and international education. She beautifully draws together theory, analyses, and narratives of her study abroad participants with very clear contributions to literature and practice. Rosa carefully positions herself and argues that we need to start seeing, listening, and reflecting on study abroad outside of the historical lens through which international exchange has been studied. So congratulations, Rosa, and we're very happy to have you with us here today. And with that, I will turn it over to Rosa.
Thank you so much. Depending on where you are in the world today, good morning or afternoon, good evening. I first want to thank Gail Paradise Kelly for inspiring the field of comparative education by amplifying silenced voices, including women, and particularly those who have been colonized and oppressed. I'm incredibly proud to receive this award in her name. And I also want to thank the Comparative and International Education Society and its leadership, including Dr. Shafiq and Dr. Monkman. I want to thank the Gail P. Kelly Subcommittee Chair, Dr. Ross. Thank you for your introduction. And all of the subcommittee members who took time to read our work. Although he can't be here today, I'd like to thank my nominator, my mentor, my faculty advisor, Dr. Ruzbe Shirazi, for his guidance, his brilliance, and his continuous support. I also want to thank my dissertation committee for all of their feedback and for motivating me throughout this process. I want to extend my gratitude to my partner and my mentor, Dr. Fernando Tormosa Ponte, for his incessant support and his inspiration. I also want to thank my family and my friends who supported me throughout this process, throughout this journey. I thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Lorena Sanchez Tyson, for your research. I'm so honored to accept this award alongside you. And lastly, this award truly belongs to my participants. I thank them for trusting me with their beautiful and inspiring narratives. Really, my motivation for this dissertation stems from my role as a practitioner who has led study abroad for marginalized communities. I recognized early on in my career in study abroad that the benefits in study abroad that was portrayed in literature and best practices and programmatic marketing really included very specific benefits such as intercultural communication, development, communication, employment gains, global citizenship, and language acquisition. This discourse in study abroad really rests on the assumption that these benefits extend to all students universally, regardless of their social group identity, regardless of their social class, educational pathways, and mobility histories. And so what these claims, and I call these claims universalist assumptions about study abroad, they're limited to the particular demographic that exists in literature, predominantly white, heteronormative, traditionally aged, financially capable female college students, and white female college students. And so given that in 2019, white women made up 67% of study abroad participants, the literature on study abroad is primarily centered on a dominant voice, which invisibilizes first-generation low-income minoritized students, both in practice and in scholarship. I departed from these dominant discourses and situated my study by presenting a theoretical framework called the educational mobility justice. I refer to this perspective as a perspective to challenge dominant assumptions within the field of education by seeking to understand the trace histories and the uneven and unequal mobility of students. I conceptualize study abroad as a phenomenon that is enmeshed in the broader politics of educational mobility and draw critical attention to a larger history of constrained mobility and racialized surveillance that operates in the United States. My research really relied heavily and was informed by Mimi Scheller's mobility justice framework. This was so productive for examining mobility as the potential for movement. In this way, we acknowledge that many people do not have easy access to mobility. All people have different capacities and potentials for movement. But in general, we can say that more privileged groups have greater control and greater potential for ease of movement. And so recognizing that mobility is an unequally distributed resource, I asked my participants to reflect on their experiences of mobility, their dreams of travel, their communities, and experiences of immobility prior to studying abroad. I found that structural inequalities such as class, further complicated by nationality, race, gender, trauma, intergenerational effects, really shaped the extent to which participants could even imagine the possibility of leisurely travel. And so what I find is that participant narratives highlighted prior to study abroad highlight that their notions of imaginative travel were completely absent throughout their past histories. Mobility was understood as a reflection of class privilege, and mobility imaginaries, or the ability to imagine travel, were impacted by structural inequalities. Although I don't have time today to provide you with participant stories, their counter narratives highlight that structural barriers, the structural barriers that obstructed their understandings and imaginations of movement were really rooted in past experiences of forced displacement, of immigration regimes, gender and ethno-racial norms, intergenerational immobility effects, as well as their class conditions. In my 5th chapter, I find that participant narratives on the benefits of study abroad stand in sharp contrast to the universalist notions of the benefits that is depicted in literature. They experience inability to imagine possibility beyond their material constraints, an ability to experience a broadening of mobility post-study abroad, independence from unhealthy and challenging circumstances. My favorite, a spillover effect of these benefits to their family, their friends, and their peers, and a re-examination, reallocation, and reappropriation of their time while abroad and post-study abroad. And so finally, in my last chapter, I illustrate the ways that participants reframe their experiences under structures of oppression as potential sources of strength. I find that self-narration is a means for participants to enact their agency and engage in acts of subversion, particularly in spaces where power structures really have the potential to be obstructive. And so as a result of this meaning making, participants self-narrate ways that they were able to discursively deconstruct their identity, resist impositions of identity categories, and establish their identity in agentic ways. They also begin to rethink their national membership, their identity, and belonging. And so as we look ahead, I hope that scholars and practitioners can expand the educational mobility justice framework beyond the field of study abroad to really interrogate mobility injustices related to disabled members of the community, racial profiling by campus police, and policies that restrict the mobility of international students, for example. And really this research highlights the immobilities that the COVID-19 pandemic has created as students, faculty, and staff had to pivot and face the complex and intersecting systems of immobility. So that was a lot of information that really skims the surface of my research, but takes into account the most salient aspects. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rosa. And I know I speak for all of us when I say we're really excited to see more your work as it appears in different platforms. And I know I really loved reading your dissertation. I'm looking forward to see not just what comes from the framework and other researchers, but also what you bring and continue to bring to the comparative and international education field. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to introduce our other award winner, Lorena Sanchez Tyson. Lorena Sanchez Tyson completed her dissertation at the University College London. The dissertation is entitled Literacy for Life and Work, an Exploration of an Indigenous Bilingual Program for Adults in Mexico. And Lorena's dissertation also resulted in numerous comments from our committee and from others speaking to its impact on all of us. A few of those comments I will just read. Lorena's dissertation reflects on bilingual education models and the impact of literacy among Indigenous adults in communities within 3 Mexican states. In her dissertation, Lorena reflects on how the literacy practices both elicit experiences of shame and give rise to examples of pride, resistance, resilience, and rights. Her brilliant scholarship with Indigenous communities in the Global South shows us a way to move from extractive research on Indigenous peoples to revitalizing research with Indigenous peoples. So congratulations again, Lorena. It's very exciting to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen, and to everyone. I couldn't have said it better than Rosa just did, and really just extending my gratitude to all of those who spent the time to, and now just this opportunity to be able to share a bit about my work and continue the conversation. I think this is what maybe several people I've spoken to who have been through the process of writing a doctoral dissertation, you know, there has to come a time when you close that chapter. And I always felt like the work wasn't over. And I had a discussion with a friend, and she said, well, this can be your life's work. Like this might be the beginning of a bigger conversation. And so that's how I kind of am hoping that this conversation continues around my work. And I really, really appreciate the committee's time and acknowledgement. It's a huge, huge honor. And I think, again, I was thinking about the process and the experience and the kind of countless people that have helped get me here. And I will say, you know, first and foremost, I want to say that none of this would have been possible without the participants of my study. So those people who I name in my work, but they have a pseudonym, but I know their names and I remember their faces and I remember their kindness and I remember their willingness to speak to me, to open up, to, you know, I began this project with a clear fascination and curiosity and just, again, a kind of determination to learn more about the role and meaning of literacy in Indigenous contexts in a country that I'm from, but I was born and raised, but I don't speak an Indigenous language and I don't self-identify as Indigenous. So navigating my position within these communities while, you know, wanting to learn more about them and the way that they engage with literacy, the way they contest it, the way they shape it and continue to shape it, despite, you know, we're talking colonial histories and all of these tensions. It was, again, I started out wanting to, of course, foreground their voices and highlight their experiences. But as I say in my acknowledgements, I started out wanting to write your story, and a part of my story is written in those pages too, because it really was a kind of transformative process all throughout the kind of writing of it. So I thank them first and foremost. And I would absolutely have to thank my supervisors, Sam and Amy, for their very, very insightful, supportive, I always said, you know, I wouldn't have been able to do this work without them. Absolutely, I know that. They gave me the kind of intellectual freedom to make mistakes, to explore, to engage, you know, be involved in other projects, to write other things, to always question, and they always gave me such wonderful feedback. And to my examiners, Jenny and Sheila, who also gave me such helpful comments. And my research community at Institute of Education, at UCL Institute of Education, I also say in my acknowledgements that writing kind of the bulk of the thesis in a tiny, cramped London flat, away from family, during a pandemic, I wouldn't recommend anyone, you know, writing a doctoral dissertation in the middle of a pandemic. It wasn't fun, but it was, it can be quite an isolating experience, but I never ever felt alone because of my core kind of group of doctoral students, my peers who were supporting me throughout that process with long Teams chats, with virtual writing sessions, with encouragement, with feedback. So they were crucial also in this process. And there were people who supported my field work, which I luckily was able to do right before everything closed. And again, really, really important in this process, of course, are my friends and family, my husband, Douglas, and my parents in particular. And yeah, it's one of those things where the focus of the research, again, was really focused around the kind of role and meaning of literacy. And then digging deeper, it was trying to find out the perspectives of those who directly engage with it. I argue that this is kind of the first study of its kind to look at this particular program in Mexico, which is relatively new. And it's still kind of one of those emerging fields in terms of trying to kind of, a lot of literacy studies center around kind of children's literacies and many kind of other school-based, institutional-based things. But I was quite interested in this program in terms of kind of the non-formal nature of it, the way it organizes around communities and people rather than kind of four walls, and the ways in which people engage with it and the purposes what they engage with it. How do they perceive literacy and processes of literacy learning in relation to their lived experiences as Indigenous adults in Mexico from one of the many diverse communities and groups? Do they engage with the program because it is a government-led program, but what actually happens on the ground? What happens, that kind of those disjunctures between policies and statutes and laws and everything on paper, and then what actually happens in practice? You know, why are they engaging with it? Many of them had many, like the range of reasons that they engaged with this program were quite different. And the influence it had kind of on their lives and their livelihoods were also quite different. But ultimately, what it came down to, and what I hope to, again, continue to work on and learn about and engage more scholars, you know, in discussions about, are the ways in which I argue literacies are deeply, deeply tied to the processes and kind of the project of Indigenous self-determination, and what this means both linguistically, culturally, going forward, recognizing the past, and then kind of reframing and looking at the future, and what that means in terms of justice and justice in and through education. So again, I think that the work has just started. I am looking forward to continuing it, and I thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Lorena. And as you continue this conversation, we are very much looking forward to seeing how it progresses, as I said to Rosa as well. And I also, as you both, I think, mentioned COVID-19, so I feel like we have an especial need to just draw attention to how difficult it was, as you said, to be writing doctoral dissertations during COVID-19, and what that means for just how much we need to acknowledge all of the work that you put in, both of you have put into your work. You know, myself and the rest of the community, I think, are really also truly grateful to have had the opportunity to engage with it as part of this awards process. So congratulations to both of you again.
Thank you. Thanks.
And I would like to echo Dr. Ross and just say congratulations to both Rosa and Lorena for outstanding work. Just listening to these overviews, I was like, I think I better rush and pick up both of these dissertations. Definitely connect with me in lots of different ways. This is one of the most joyous times, I think, for the professional organization to celebrate the hard work of these emerging scholars, and also the hard work of our colleagues who take the time to review outstanding scholarship and make really difficult decisions about who to give this award to. So I hope you've had lots of time to celebrate, and that the celebration continue. So congrats again to both of you, and I look forward to meeting you in the future when we get back together in person. With that, I will hand the final word over to Dr. Monkman.
And I also wanted to extend congratulations from all of CIES. I think as an organization, we're so blessed with having such wonderful scholars, new scholars in our midst. And we all look forward to seeing where you go with your wonderful work. It's how we get challenged through the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.